Let's make some noise. You're kicking it with VERVE Radio.
Hi Sonny, thanks for coming into VERVE Radio today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, thanks for coming in. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background as a director of photography?
Yes, sure. So I've been the DoP for properly for about 5-6 years. Started off as a photographer about 10 years ago, and slowly have morphed my work into involving more and more film camera stuff. Started by pitching a really quite mediocre idea for a music video to a label that I was working with as a stills photographer. They liked it, they were willing to throw me a little bit of money for props, and we filmed it, and it sort of snowballed from there, and now I've just made a feature-length documentary.
Bit of a step up.
Yeah, and you know, it's gone along in little steps and then leaps and bounds, and yeah, it's going pretty well.
Sounds like it. So why DoP? Why director of photography?
That's a good question. I think DoP is sort of a natural step for someone coming from stills photography. It's still all about light. It's still all about an interesting look. It's also about telling a story with the camera, which is something I think is kind of neglected a lot. People sort of resort to the standard shots of things, you know, we'll always have this over the shoulder, we'll always have this wide. Whereas if you look at sort of directors like Edgar Wright, who uses the camera specifically for comedy all the time, like his camera moves are amazing. So he's someone who tells story with camera, and I really like that. As a huge fan of Spaced, really like that. Okay. Yeah, so it's not necessarily a natural progression, but it is a natural step for a photographer to get into DoP, and just another way of telling the same stories.
It's a good step. I think it's definitely a good step.
Yeah.
So what kind of recent projects are you working on, and what are you working on currently?
Recently, I've spent a long time working on a documentary called Elstree 1976, which is a documentary that follows 10 actors and bit part actors and supporting actors. There's a lot of different words. They're very specific about which words you use. Extras from the original Star Wars movie, and don't let the fact that it's about Star Wars fool you into thinking it's just about Star Wars. It's a human interest story about what a brief touch of fame does to people, and how it impacts their lives, and negatively and positively. And it's been a really interesting project to work on. Documentaries quite often, it's a talking head documentary, so it's quite difficult to inject some creative DoP work into that. But luckily the director I was working with, a guy called John Spira, he is really into super close-ups. None of this mid-shot stuff. It's the whole documentary is really tight, which is amazing because you get to see people's emotions so much more, and you can tell when the shot changes and the story changes. So if you watch the film with just the wides, when people are talking, you kind of take what they're saying at face value, and then when you watch it again with the extreme close-ups, you can see the rest of the story in their face, and you can see when they're holding something back, and you can see when they really regret something, and you can see when they're genuinely happy about something, and it adds so much. And we also got to add other creative elements. We did recreations of behind-the-scenes footage of Star Wars and some interesting shots with Star Wars toys. So there was some good fun in there as a DoP.
So one thing I noticed last night actually was the close-ups to convey the emotions, because you get a lot of the people who obviously participated in your film getting quite emotional at some points, talking about that story really. So yeah, I think the extreme close-ups are a nice touch to that.
Yeah.
You said you may not notice it directly, but if they weren't there, then you would.
There's lots of times in the doc where when people are starting to get emotional, I push in even tighter. So I spent most of the time just beyond the limit of my lens. But when they start to get really emotional, I push into the limit of my lens. And that was really interesting as a DoP to get involved in the documentary, not just from a visuals point of view, to really have to be part of it and to be listening to what people are saying, because I had to keep my cinematography relevant to how they were being, and yeah, it's really fascinating experience to kind of stay on top of the story and keep the visuals in line with that. on the hoof. You can't plan any of this stuff because it is a documentary. There's no script here. I can't plan any of these moves. It's really interesting.
Heavy job of juggling.
It was actually really, really stressful. And because it was only the four of us, director, producer, sound, and me, I was running 2 cameras at a time. So I had one camera with a close mid shot set up and basically left to its own devices, and then me running the super close up. But running both cameras, and also the style that we shot the documentary in, we wanted to keep people very relaxed, wanted to keep people very natural. Our director didn't even meet the participants before, or even talk to them by email. So we wanted to get in there and have a natural conversation with them. And that meant that we get in there and had the quickest setup times I've ever worked with. So setting up 2 cameras in 10 minutes, which is, I've since discovered, unheard of. But at the time, I thought, okay, I can do this, it's fine. Super stressful, super difficult, totally worth it.
So you think they made a big difference to the final result for the people? I
think that undoubtedly the cinematography suffered from it.
Yeah. But
it was worth it for the way we got people to talk in the documentary. It's very important. That's the point of the documentary. As a cinematographer, obviously I want my shots to look amazing. Obviously I want to be able to light things perfectly, but that's not the point with this documentary. And I think I had to kind of appreciate what my role was in it. I had to sacrifice some artistic desire or whatever, because it's, we had to work within these constraints, and those constraints made it a better documentary.
So why did you pick this project? I'm sure there's quite a few an offer to you, and then you go with Elstree 1976.
I picked it because I quite like John's previous work. Actually, I love John's previous work. He has directed a movie called Anyone Can Play Guitar, which is about the Oxford music scene. And that was really, really, really interesting story. Follows a bunch of small bands who never quite made it in Oxford. And the camera work on it was awful. And I thought, there's a brilliant documentary here. And loads of people love it, and I loved it, but I, as a DOP and as someone interested in visuals, found the visuals really, really distracting because they were really rubbish. And so when he came along, I met him at the first screening of that in London, press screening, and when the opportunity came along to work with him, I was like, oh my God, yes, because I think I can do a really good job. And I know that his previous documentary was incredible and the story was incredible. And I remember watching the documentary thinking, God, I wish I'd shot this, because it could be so much better. I don't often think that about things, but that documentary could really have killed it with some better visuals.
So it wasn't a case of taste, it was definitely a case of somebody didn't do a good job.
Yeah, I think he went through, John will, I think, gladly admit that he's quite difficult to work with for traditional DOPs. He knows what he wants, and he is quite hands-on with me and my camera. Yeah. And there's lots of DOPs, particularly older DOPs, who that is totally unacceptable. But given that this was my first feature job as a DOP, he was able to get away with a lot that a normal director probably wouldn't be able to get away with, and that worked for him. And actually that relationship works really well between me and him, because I trust him, and I'm able to let him start off a shot, and then for me to go, no, this is how you want to finish it. And he'll go, okay, yeah, sure, that's great. So I think he went through quite a lot of DOPs on the previous film, because they weren't super happy with the way they worked with him. And he wasn't super happy with it either. But yeah, we sort of gelled pretty well on this last job.
So we can expect some more projects from you two together then?
I hope so. It's been a very long journey with Elstree, mostly in post-production. I genuinely cannot remember when we first started filming. I think we might have done our first shoot at the end of 2012, but that might not be right. It might be beginning 2013. It's been in post for, gosh, 2 years. There are reasons, yeah. We finished the film, I think I did the grade a year and a half ago.
Okay.
And I think there have been distribution issues, which are long and arduous, but something you've got to go through to get a proper DVD release. When we started making the doc, I think maybe John had different ideas, but in my head it was going to be released online, really, sort of self-published sort of thing.
Yeah.
A much smaller job, much smaller deal than it's actually become. But after an incredibly successful Kickstarter campaign, it garnered a lot of attention, and has become a bigger beast than we ever thought it would be. And as a big beast, it briefly became difficult to manage, difficult to control, and things get taken out of people's hands, and which is hard because it was for 4 years or for 3 years it was our baby, particularly John and Hank's baby, but Hank Starr's the producer, but it's all good now, and they're on top of it, and it's amazing to get incredible response. It's had Critics' Choice in LA Times, New York Times.
It's amazing.
And yeah, it's out there and people like it. Some people don't like it, but that's fine. Lots of people really, really like it.
Can never please everybody, though.
Oh, absolutely. And it's this thing with a film that's attached to Star Wars. It's always going to have fans who are watching it because it's got Star Wars content, and we've never sold it as this is a documentary about Star Wars, because it's absolutely not. Star Wars happens to be a sort of a linchpin, a lot of it rests around, but it's not. If people go watching it because they want to see lots of anecdotes about Star Wars, that's definitely not the case. It's a story about, it's a portrait of 10 people and how being a small part of something massive affects them. And so mostly people who aren't fans of it are the ones who went thinking they were going to see some new behind-the-scenes footage of Star Wars they'd never seen before, and hear some hilarious stories about how a stormtrooper caught fire or something, and they're disappointed when that's not the case. But the people who've gone into it, particularly people who aren't Star Wars fans, have gone along. I've had so many responses from people saying, well, I don't really like Star Wars, and I thought I was going to be bored. But I went there and it was really interesting and really, really good. They're the ones who really, really love it. And then lots of big Star Wars fans go in understanding that they're not watching a behind-the-scenes doc on Star Wars, and they've loved it as well. It's been great. The response has been incredible. Can't believe how much. Yeah, it's still going. It's just about to have its UK DVD Blu-ray release. Hopefully that'll go well. It's done well in America. It had a limited cinema run, I think 70 odd cinemas, something like that. Did pretty well there. It's seeing, getting to see something we did, getting to see something that was shot on a Canon 5D Mark II up on a huge cinema screen is amazing. That's a camera that I've got at home. It's my camera. It's nothing we rented, and seeing how good it could look was really shocking, really surprising.
Just shows what you can do with low budget, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you can pick up one of those cameras second-hand for 800 quid today. And we shot something that was shown at the London Film Festival in 2015 on that camera. It's amazing. Absolutely unbelievable. And you know what? If we had known that it would ever be shown properly on cinema screens, not just the one-off director Q&A ones, but properly be seen at the London Film Festival and stuff like that, we'd have probably ended up renting C300s or something, because we need this, but actually it looks brilliant. It looks really, really good. I'm so shocked how that footage holds up.
I think it's good for people to know that as well, because anybody who might be sort of watching or listening, here's that you can make something that can go worldwide on 800 quid camera.
Absolutely. If you're worried about if you're worried that, I can't do this because technically what I've got isn't up to spec, no, you're wrong. You absolutely can. And, there were episodes of House were shot on the 5D Mark II, and this was shot on the 5D Mark II and a bunch of other things. And I still, you still get people skeptical of it, but they're wrong. You'd watch it, we watched it at the Picture House Central, and you couldn't tell it apart from any other HD film. It looked spectacular, really surprised. Really, really, really surprised. Very pleasantly surprised.
So where do you go now? You've had this big successful project there, Elstree, and what projects are you working on at the moment?